This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
All right, here we are. New year, new crimes. How's it going, Susan?
New year, new crimes sums it up pretty well. I mean, we think we started 2025 off with a bang, huh?
Literally started it off with multiple bangs.
Bangs. Ugh.
It's been wild. But before we jump into the New Year's Day attacks, let's talk about our old friend Luigi Mangione.
Luigi, listen, he's still there. He's causing a ruckus in jail, apparently. Not by his own doing. There's a lot to talk about.
There is, yeah. So, I mean, he spent, his first Christmas, first of many, behind bars. And now, has been charged federally. That was really the big news that came out before we had a chance to talk about it at the end of the year, where, initially he was charged with a second-degree murder in New York. And we talked about how odd that was, that they didn't have a way to get this as their highest offense in the state of New York. But there's always something going on behind the scenes. So the feds were working secretly to get their charges set up, and he's been hit hard with these federal charges. I mean, this is not playing around. So he is now facing multiple federal counts and is eligible for the death penalty.
Wow.
If found guilty. And, it requires a unanimous jury verdict, but it's possible that he would be sentenced to death for these crimes, which was not something that was on the table previously. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is. I mean, I think it's funny you say unanimous by the jury, because I think one of the things New York is struggling with currently is a clean jury pool, because people are so bifurcated on this matter. People are so polarized, right, by this.
Yes.
There is a lot of support. I don't know what his legal fund donations are up to, but it's pretty significant. And there's protesters and the Free Luigi signs everywhere. And I know we talked about the merchandise, but yeah, I think if you're a jury of your peers, as legally it needs to be, this is going to be a tough one.
Yes, definitely. And so we know that he has had multiple court appearances and is attracting quite the fan base. So most recently, he was in court and pled not guilty to murder and terrorism charges. So that's a play.
Yeah, that is. I guess, what are you going to do? There's definitely a legal strategy. Maybe there's some deals to be made. Who knows? Maybe this is how the defense team keeps a window open for future negotiations. I don't know that you give it all away at first. I mean, we're all sort of scratching our heads, I think, about that move, but there's got to be a reason.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing the long game, right? So if he pleads not guilty now, that gives him more options down the road. You have the possibility of getting a more favorable deal if you have it still on the table that he could plead guilty in exchange for possibly life in prison, or, maybe if he gets really lucky, 25 years or something. But, it's definitely going to be a very long road for Luigi. He has a lot of legal events in his future. It's going to be years before we see him, actually on trial. And so whenever he pleaded guilty, it was to the state charges in New York. So the federal case, he hasn't been been brought up on those charges where he's had a chance to enter a plea yet,
Mm.
as I understand it. So that will be, um, another instance where he could potentially plead guilty. But again, if he has a good attorney, they're going to advise him to hold that card close to the vest and wait to play it, at the most strategic time. So I was interested that the media has noted that there have been lots of young women who've come to the courtroom to quote unquote show their support for Luigi. So that's an odd choice of activity. How you wake up in the morning and you think I'm going to go sit in court
Yeah,
and let Luigi see that
support a
yeah,
stranger. I mean, it's very,
support a strange murderer. Yeah.
straight. Yeah. I mean, it just feels kind of cultish at this point. Um, and you wonder, are people just that bored? Or do they actually feel that strongly about what he did and the righteousness of it all? I mean,
Yeah, one of the things that always surprised me in all the murder trials that I covered for 48 hours was the courtroom looky-loos. And
mhm.
so they would just be people who had really no connection to the case, but they would come religiously every day to every hearing. Once the trial started, they'd be there day in, day out, sitting on those hard wooden benches, and they were just curious. This was their entertainment. Sometimes it was retirees, sometimes it was people who, had just gotten obsessed with the case and they're taking time off work. Or they're students and they're skipping school to go to these high profile murder trials. So that's always fascinated me. And, there's just a segment of our society that would drop anything to go to a trial like this. So I'm sure Luigi's trial will be a highly attended event. And if it ends up being, a federal trial, that, if that trial actually goes forward, they don't allow cameras in the courtroom. So it would
I
be
was gonna ask
even
that.
more, yeah, that would be even more like intriguing, just because if you weren't there in person, you wouldn't be able to see it at all. It's not like there's going to be court TV
Right,
if it's a federal case. So I'm
right.
sure sketch artists everywhere sharpening their pencils to get Luigi's profile going on if that's the case. But
Yeah.
I would imagine in New York, and with the high level of interest in the case, that if it's a state trial, that they would allow cameras. I bet
I think
that
they
would
have so
probably,
far,
yeah.
right? I mean, what we've seen on the news has not been sketches. It's been the actual footage of him sitting at his defense table. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it'll be interesting if there end up being 2 trials. I don't see that happening. I think
Well,
one's
they
gonna,
they
yeah.
said they're gonna run them parallel. So, I think,
Interesting.
yeah, and so venue was interesting to me for both reasons. I mean, if you're gonna do them in parallel, I mean, you're clearly not shuffling him between locations. So now I don't you have 2 jury pool. I mean, how does it work?
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. And, what I've seen in other cases where they're just a long laundry list of charges is the prosecution will actually hold a couple charges back, like bullets in the chamber, so that if somehow the defendant is found not guilty, they haven't put all their charges up at once. And so they're saving some that allows them to take them to trial on a separate case if they were to somehow lose the first round. So to me, the idea that they would take it all in one shot would really surprise me, because you would want to have some kind of ace in the hole, some kind of safety net, if you're the state of New York or, the US Justice Department. If somehow the jury finds him not guilty, you would still want to be able to bring him up on these additional charges. And um that's what I would expect, that they would hold back some of the charges and still be able to do that. But the idea of him getting off on these charges to
Yeah.
me is so far-fetched. I mean, it would be extremely unlikely, given everything that we know about the physical evidence, the video evidence, his own words. It's really hard to imagine a scenario where he could actually be found not guilty, because again, that would have to be unanimous. What I could definitely see would be some kind of hung jury, with cases with this much emotion, like you were talking about how polarizing, of a figure he is. There could potentially be, a hung jury situation where people might feel sympathy towards him. They might somehow get on the jury, even though they're supposed to be, totally unbiased and objective. So yeah, it'll be quite the spectacle, no matter what level of trial he ends up having. We know it'll be something, along the lines of OJ Simpson or Michael Jackson or, Luigi Mangione. He wasn't a celebrity before, but he's become this, anti-hero, folk hero. He's got all these various titles floating around now. So it's something to see. And, as someone who just follows crime cases, it's these outliers that stand out. He's not like the typical person who's convicted of or who's not like the typical person who's charged with murder.
Right.
And who, it's certainly interesting just to see everything that's gone into this case so far, and we'll see what else is revealed.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly an unlikely candidate for for this to have happened. I mean, you see all the Ivy League kids out there who graduate and go off to have great jobs, and we never hear about murder, or, they are very not likely to go on to mastermind a plan like this. Um,
Yeah, and just the fact that he didn't have any personal connection
yeah,
to United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He wasn't even a United Healthcare
policy
client.
holder. Yeah,
Yeah,
no
he
one in
didn't
his
even.
family was a policy holder. I mean, they looked at all this. I mean, no,
Yeah.
it was definitely intentional and masterminded. And we're gonna, we have the manifesto, obviously, but there's going to be a lot more psychological digging, I think, into this case to understand it better. Now, I have a question as far as protocol. So they're running these cases in parallel. Allegedly, they're going to. Let's say he gets convicted on both. Where does he end up? What, federal prison, state prison? Who
Yeah.
gets him?
So federal, it's like seniority rules, right? So federal kind of has the upper hand. It's the more serious charges. So he would end up, if he's convicted on state and federal would get him. So that would, of course, if he's convicted and it's a death penalty, then he'd be on death row. So
At a
there's
federal at a
at a
federal
federal,
penitentiary.
that's correct, at a federal prison. So that remains to be seen. Any of these charges could be pled out, charges could be dropped, removed, so many different things could happen, but it'll be interesting to see what he actually goes to trial for
Yeah.
and when.
Mhm.
And where he ends up. I think we know it's going to be behind bars somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine that he would be able to use an insanity defense, as insane as the case is.
Right.
I don't think he would be able to use one and end up in some type of, mental facility, just because I think the prosecution would fight that so hard, given his background and his planning,
Yeah.
that went
Yeah.
into this. And he doesn't really appear to be deluded beyond the obvious narcissist, egocentric,
Right.
those types of delusions, but he doesn't seem to be thinking that like everyone's out to get him, or, that sort of thing. He had to kill or be killed. I mean, those are the kind of defenses you can use with insanity. If you actually believed that your own life was in danger, whether or not it was true,
Mhm.
if you're that deluded to think, that people are all coming to get you and you're in a war zone and you have to fight to survive, but there's just no evidence of that,
No.
so
Yeah.
and you would be hard pressed to come up with a defense, I think, that would indicate that he was not fully aware of what he was doing, where he was doing it, and how serious the crime was.
Right. I agree with that. I mean, we are not psychologists, but he certainly appears sane as he, understands the charges, leans into plead not guilty. I mean, he's certainly being advised. Something I did think was interesting is that not one member of his family showed up in that courtroom.
Wow.
Nobody. So that is a statement right there that I think is
Yeah, it really
notable.
is.
Yeah. I mean, you have strangers, as you mentioned, showing up to support and rally for and get behind and show support for, and then his actual family doesn't show. So
And we know he has a big family,
big
so
family.
that is
Yeah.
also something.
And not too far away. It's not like they're being flown in from another country. I mean, they're 3 hours away
Yeah.
driving. Yeah. So, thought that was interesting. I think his mom was sort of like, this doesn't surprise me. I mean, it was just a very strange comments out of the family. Not strange, I guess, if they kind of knew, had lost touch with him, I think the mother had filed a missing persons report at some point for him in Northern
Right.
California. So yeah, it's just, you know, of course he is a hardened criminal, alleged criminal. And what he allegedly did was horrific. And then there is something, where you look at that innocent, that's not the right word, but you look at a 26-year-old boy and you
Yeah.
think, wow, his mother didn't even show. I mean, there's just
Yeah.
something interesting, I think, psychologically about that, and I think that also is helping to drive so much public support for him in the wrong way, I believe, but I think that's
Interesting.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Luigi's not the only criminal making headlines. We have some other really big cases that have broken over the new year. I know I was just looking at those news alerts thinking, is this really happening? Because, as a journalist, over the holidays, that's when you run those evergreen stories. That's whenever the news feed barely ever changes. And it's, the time whenever most people take, their days off. And we sort of joke that it's like the B team, is on all the broadcasts and at all the news desks. And it's the junior employees, it's the interns who are manning the desk on those days.
I'm
And
sure. Well, they
I
certainly got to cut their teeth this year,
oh
2025.
my gosh, yeah, this was nuts. So, I mean, the first story that broke was out of New Orleans. So about 3 a.m. New Year's Day, the French Quarter, Bourbon Street, was attacked. There was a vehicle that was driven through and killed 14 people. There were other reports that there was a firearm used, that there were explosives found that didn't detonate, but
Mhm.
it was just a panicked scene, just completely chaotic, a terrorist attack, by, as it turns out, a member of the US military, which is, really horrifying.
Yeah. I mean, this one was absolutely terrifying.
And so they've identified him as Shamsa Din Jabbar, and he has been seen on a bicycle by video surveillance going down the French Quarter in October.
Mhm.
So they believe that he was, conducting reconnaissance and checking out the area that he would later attack. And so, we've got Luigi on a bicycle, we've got Jabbar on a bicycle.
I mean,
It's bizarre, but it's happening. So,
yeah.
um, yeah. So they've released this photo. He looks like this middle-aged kind of dad bod guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he does not um
Another one who doesn't look the part. Not that there's a part
wouldn't
to
turn
look,
any
but
heads. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, would absolutely blend into a crowd. Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. So that's pretty terrifying just how normal, people can look. I guess, when you say that, I mean you picture someone I do at least, like in the full black, head to toe. They've got tactical gear on, or they've got, some type of menacing attire, which, um, it's just not always the case, right?
Yeah,
And
I
it,
actually think it's probably becoming less so. I
yeah.
mean, the goal is to fit in so you're not identified.
Okay, so that's not the only attack that we had over the New Year's holiday. It was just the very next day that there was an explosion outside of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, a
Mm.
cyber truck that burst into flames, and whenever they opened it up, they found that there was a man who'd shot himself inside the vehicle, and so that has obviously caused a lot of panic across the country. We have New Orleans, we have Las Vegas, we have these two popular New Year's celebration cities
Mhm.
that were sites of these attacks. And so, the in Las Vegas, it was 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberger, and he
Mhm.
was also a veteran, which is pretty strange just to have
Um,
these 2 attacks one day apart. It's it's
yeah.
certainly starting a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, even crazier was that both of these men served at the same army base. The police have now confirmed that, and that they likely overlapped both at Fort Bragg and then in Afghanistan. I mean, that's interesting. So there's no evidence they knew each other, but for two men to come out of an overlapped army experience and commit these horrible acts, I mean, that's certainly worth looking at, I think, from a psychological perspective.
Definitely. And, there's certainly coincidences that happen, but this is hitting some major red flags with the fact that they not only are veterans, they not only overlap in their bases, in their country of service, but they also use the same online rental platform to
Mhm.
rent their vehicles. So they both use Turo to rent these vehicles, and it's not like it's Avis, it's not Hertz. This is
Right.
not all that common, all that known. So the idea that they both use this platform is what I saw reported was initially what caused authorities to think, well, could they know each other? Because you
Mhm.
see two servicemen, well, my goodness, that's millions of people, one day apart. But then you start getting these other connections, and it's really starting to make people wonder, out loud, not even afraid to say it. Did they coordinate this? Did they know each other? Or is this a coincidence? Maybe
Right.
it's going to be interesting to see. I know that they don't have right now anyone coming forward saying, "Oh yeah, they knew each other, they were radicalized," or
Mhm.
anything like that. But it certainly looks like they had plenty of opportunities to have coordinated this. Actually,
Yeah, and they're even saying that Livelsberger was in the, Green Berets, which is an elite part of the army, which is a special forces unit, and he was an expert in guerrilla warfare.
wow,
So the Green Berets, I guess, they are counterterrorism, and they use these very unconventional techniques, and they're specially trained. So, and the explosives that did not, thank goodness, detonate in New Orleans were not explosive typically used by the United States or Europe. They were a Middle Eastern variety, and so his failure to detonate them was because he had used the wrong detonating device or something. Like, thank goodness, obviously, thank
yeah,
God that happened. But both seem to have been trained in unconventional techniques. So it just adds to the, do you wonder, or does
it
everyone
does.
who gets deployed in Afghanistan and spends time in a Fort Bragg get this specialized training? Unclear. But it is, and I was thinking, if these two are related, were there more planned that didn't happen? I mean, you don't know how big this
Yeah.
network goes. It's just something else
Well,
scary.
but gosh, it just makes me think of like Homeland, the Showtime.
Yes, yes.
It's like it's
Yes.
come to life in a lot of ways. Like here we are seeing this play out, and it's really terrifying.
I know. And what I found, probably not related at all, and I don't know how you'd know ahead of time, but in the countdown, if you were to have watched the countdown, I forget what channel, but like the global countdown, station on television, every time zone had a city chosen. New Orleans, I believe, was the city in that time zone. Las Vegas was the Pacific time zone chosen for the show. So it's interesting that media would have been there. I mean, media would have been anywhere in a major city, but televised were these two cities. And obviously, this happened after the fact, but it would have really
Yeah.
drawn. Maybe they knew a lot of attention would have been on these two cities in particular. Just, I mean, just a terrible way to start the new year.
Yes, it is indeed.
And so I think the other thing that struck me as odd about the Las Vegas attack was, you're going to blow up a Cybertruck. You have so many explosives, and yet you make sure you seal the deal and shoot yourself. I mean, the whole thing is like, you were going to die anyway.
Yeah.
It was sort of almost a coward move of just in case, or, this might be less painful. I don't know.
It's also so bizarre that he used a Cybertruck, which is like the only vehicle that could hold that blast in. Like of all the cars to choose.
Right. And I know I said the same thing to myself when I saw it. I thought, how odd that you're not using a car with a full gas tank. You have to bring in your own explosives, and I forget where I saw it, but you're an army guy. He allegedly was a Trump supporter, yet he goes to the Trump hotel and uses an Elon Musk created vehicle to.
It makes no sense on any level. So, I mean,
Yeah, it was
yeah.
odd. And then you have a suicide, but not by the cause of the I mean, again, by the way, by some act of God, no one but he was killed. I mean,
Yeah.
this could have been, I know there were injuries, and that's awful, but this could have also been just such a terrible, sort of moot. Like, he really just scared people, injured a few, killed himself. I mean, you
Yeah.
kinda look at that and you're like, "Well, then what was the point?" I mean, thank God nothing happened, but, like, it seems like both of these were not planned out well, and again, thank goodness for that. But, like, the guy in in New Orleans, the detonators don't work. In
Yeah.
Vegas, it's clearly a contained and wrong kind of, the statement, to my knowledge, there were no statements released by either of these men.
Right.
So we don't have an intent. We don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what the purpose was. And it just seems it's a horribly pointless thing that just was so unnecessary.
Yeah, you just know that these people are deeply unwell, and the idea that this somehow made sense to them and was worth dying for is really hard to fathom. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
That's why it's
that could
justice
definitely.
pending, because
Yeah. Well, on that note, thanks for joining us today, and we will be back next week with an all-new episode. Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air. Thanks for joining us.